My name is Hannah Clark, and I had always believed that love didn't have to be loud to be real. I believed in consistency, in routine, in showing up every day without needing applause for it. And when I stood beside my husband on mild spring afternoon, I wasn't thinking about grand passion, I was thinking about forever. I wasn't the woman who needed grand gestures or dramatic declarations to feel secure. I believed in quiet love. The kind that didn't need to be posted or proven. The kind that lived in small routines and steady presence. And when I stood beside my husband on our wedding day, I felt calm, certain, safe. His name felt permanent next to mine. In the beginning, our life wasn't extraordinary, but it was ours. Sunday mornings with sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter, shared grocery lists, soft laughter over burnt dinners, the way he used to reach for my hand absent-mindedly while driving. Those small, unremarkable moments became the foundation of my trust. I never felt the need to check his phone. I never felt threatened by female coworkers. I never questioned late meetings. Not because I was blind, but because I believed that if you marry someone, you choose to believe in them fully. I thought suspicion was a crack you invite into your own home. So I protected our peace, quietly. When his career started accelerating, I became his support system without hesitation. I adjusted my schedule around his deadlines. I moved cities when he said the opportunity was too good to pass up. I told myself my ambitions could wait. That marriage meant seasons, that sometimes one person runs ahead while the other steadies the ground. I didn't resent him. I was proud of him. I told everyone how hard he worked, how driven he was, how lucky I felt to stand beside someone so focused. I believed sacrifice was proof of love. And because I loved deeply, I sacrificed quietly. But love, when it's one-sided in its flexibility, begins to bend in dangerous ways. The first change wasn't loud. It was subtle, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. He stopped telling me details about his day. Conversations grew shorter. Where he once described office politics and inside jokes, now he summarized everything with one-word answers. Work was busy, traffic was awful, meetings ran long. I noticed, but I explained it away. Success brings stress, I told myself. Responsibility drains energy. Marriage isn't supposed to stay in the honeymoon phase forever. I chose maturity over suspicion. Then the late nights became more frequent. At first, I waited up for him with dinner reheated and ready. I'd sit at the table pretending not to watch the clock. When he walked in, I'd smile, masking the ache of another evening spent alone. Eventually, I stopped waiting at the table and started waiting in bed. Then I stopped waiting altogether. Not because I didn't care, but because waiting began to feel like humiliation. His phone became an extension of his body. Always face down. Always within reach. He used to leave it anywhere. Now it followed him from room to room. If it buzzed at night, he would glance at it quickly before angling the screen away from me. The first time I asked about it, I kept my voice light. He said it was nothing important. The second time, he seemed irritated. By the third time, I apologized for even asking. That was when something shifted inside me. I started questioning my own instincts more than I questioned him. If I felt uneasy, I labeled it insecurity. If I sensed distance, I blamed stress. I didn't want to be the wife who doubted her husband without proof. I didn't want to damage something sacred with baseless fear. So I swallowed it, quietly. Physical affection faded in small increments. Not enough to spark alarm, but enough to leave me restless at night. He would roll away sooner. His kisses became routine rather than intentional. When I reached for him, sometimes he responded. Sometimes he didn't. I told myself this was what long-term love looked like. Comfort, familiarity, stability. But comfort doesn't feel like loneliness when you're lying inches apart from someone. I began shrinking in subtle ways. I talked less about my own goals. I postponed returning to school. I declined invitations from friends because I didn't want to explain why I felt disconnected in my own marriage. I told everyone we were just busy. Busy is a respectable excuse. It protects image. And I was determined to protect ours. There's something painful about realizing you were guarding a door that someone else had already unlocked from the inside. Sometimes I would catch him smiling at his phone in a way I hadn't seen in months. Not a broad laugh, just a soft, private smile, the kind that suggests intimacy. I would look at him and feel like I was watching something through glass, close enough to see, too far to touch. Still, I trusted him, because trust had become part of my identity. I was the calm one, the understanding wife, the mature partner who didn't make scenes. I believed loyalty meant staying steady even when your heart started whispering warnings. And those whispers grew louder. He started dressing differently for work, paying attention to details he once ignored. A new cologne appeared on the bathroom counter, one he hadn't worn before. When I asked about it, he said he wanted a change. People are allowed to change. I repeated that to myself like a mantra. But change, when it excludes you, feels less like growth and more like departure. There were nights I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of something unspoken pressing between us. I wanted to ask directly. I wanted to say the words forming in my throat, "Are you still here with me?" But I didn't, because I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I tightened my grip on patience. I convinced myself that love required endurance, that storms pass if you don't panic. I thought I was protecting our marriage. I didn't realize I was protecting the illusion of it. And while I was choosing trust over suspicion, calm over confrontation, silence over chaos, something was already shifting beyond my reach. I thought protecting our peace meant staying quiet. I didn't realize I was protecting the very thing that would erase me. The distance didn't happen overnight. If it had, I might have reacted faster. I might have defended myself. I might have demanded answers. But it didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like fog, slowly, quietly, until I realized I couldn't see clearly anymore. At first, it was small things. He stopped reaching for me first. That sounds insignificant until you realize how much of intimacy lives in instinct. The hand on my waist while passing in the kitchen disappeared. The random forehead kisses faded. The way he used to pull me closer in his sleep stopped happening altogether. Physical affection didn't vanish completely, it just became reactive instead of intentional. If I reached, sometimes he responded. If I didn't, nothing happened. I told myself that long marriages settle into comfort. But comfort isn't supposed to feel like loneliness. Our conversations grew shorter. He answered questions with efficiency instead of curiosity. When I asked how his day went, I got summaries instead of stories. Busy. Fine. Same as usual. He used to give me details. Names. Moments. Frustrations. Now I felt like I was interviewing a stranger who didn't want to be interviewed. I noticed. And then I immediately blamed myself for noticing. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe this was just adulthood flattening everything into routine. The phone changed next. It used to lie anywhere. Kitchen counter, couch cushion, nightstand. Now it never left his hand. If it buzzed, he checked it instantly. If I walked into the room while he was texting, the screen tilted slightly away. Not dramatically. Just enough. The first time I asked who it was, I kept my tone light. He answered quickly. Work stuff. The second time, he sounded mildly irritated. By the third time, he didn't even look up when he responded. And that was when I started apologizing. I'm sorry. I was just asking. I didn't want to sound suspicious. I didn't want to be the wife who polices. I didn't want to damage trust by appearing distrustful. So, I swallowed the discomfort. Late nights became routine. Meetings that ran long. Clients who needed extra attention. Traffic that seemed to worsen every week. I would reheat dinner, then reheat it again, then eventually put it away untouched. When he walked in, I studied his face carefully. Searching for guilt. Searching for hesitation. But he was composed. Calm. Almost practiced. If I mentioned missing him, he would sigh softly. Not angrily. Just tired. He said I was overthinking again. He said I had a tendency to create problems where none existed. He said I needed to relax. That word relax started to feel like dismissal disguised as advice. I began doubting my instincts more than I doubted him. If my chest tightened when his phone lit up at midnight, I told myself I was insecure. If my stomach dropped when he smiled down at a message, I told myself I was projecting. If I felt the space between us widening in bed, I blamed stress. He didn't have to gaslight me aggressively. I did most of it for him. There was a night I told him gently that I felt him slipping away. I chose my words carefully, almost clinically, so they wouldn't sound emotional. He leaned back and looked at me like I had disappointed him. He said I was being dramatic. He said I needed to stop analyzing everything. He said he felt suffocated by constant suspicion. Constant suspicion. I had barely asked anything. But somehow I ended up apologizing again. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. And in that moment, I realized something painful. I was working harder to protect his comfort than he was to protect my peace. I stopped talking to my friends about us. The few times someone asked how we were doing, I smiled automatically. Busy, but good. Marriage takes work. You know how it is. I refused to be the woman who aired her doubts publicly. I refused to embarrass him. I refused to let anyone look at my marriage with pity. So I isolated myself inside it. I edited my stories. I softened my tone. I removed any mention of distance. Because if I said it out loud, it would become real. The psychological war inside me grew louder. Trust him, I told myself. He's your husband. But what if something is wrong? Don't accuse without proof. But why does your body feel like this every night? You're being insecure. Or maybe you're being ignored. I chose trust every time. Not because I was foolish, but because I believed that doubting him would mean doubting the foundation of my entire life. And I wasn't ready to watch that crumble. There were other small details. A new cologne that didn't smell like the one I bought him. A sudden interest in dressing sharper for ordinary workdays. A subtle defensiveness when certain names came up. The way he locked the bathroom door when he used to leave it open. Each detail alone was harmless. Together, they formed a pattern I kept refusing to trace. The worst part wasn't the possibility of another woman. It was the realization that I felt more alone with him than without him. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, wondering when I had started feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. I wanted to ask directly. I wanted to demand honesty. But fear held me still. Because what if I was wrong? And what if I wasn't? So I kept choosing silence. I told myself love required patience. That seasons change. That people go through phases. I convinced myself that strong women don't panic at shadows. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a shadow. It was absence. And absence has weight. The night it finally shifted from intuition to evidence, it wasn't dramatic. He came home later than usual. Calm. Polite. Slightly distant. He mentioned traffic near a part of town he rarely visited. The explanation was smooth, almost rehearsed. I nodded. After he went to shower, I picked up his jacket to hang it properly. Something slipped from the pocket and landed softly on the floor. A folded receipt. My hands trembled before I even opened it. 2 entrees. 2 glasses of wine. A location nowhere near where he said he had been. A timestamp that didn't match his story. And suddenly, every red flag I had explained away stood in front of me. Undeniable. And then one night, I found something that didn't match his story. The receipt felt heavier than paper should feel. I stood in our bedroom staring at those 2 lines, 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and for a moment, my mind refused to process what my eyes were clearly reading. I remember the sound of the shower running in the background, steady and ordinary, like nothing in my world had just shifted. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, like ink spreading through water. My fingers started trembling before I even understood why. My body knew before my heart allowed it. A cold numbness crawled up my arms, settling in my chest. I tried to breathe normally, but each inhale felt shallow, incomplete. 2 entrees. Not one. Not a business lunch receipt split between colleagues. 2 dinners. 2 wines. An intimate setting he had described as traffic delays and long meetings. I folded the paper carefully, almost mechanically, and placed it back where I found it. I didn't want to confront him while my emotions were raw. I didn't want to accuse without certainty. So I waited. 3 days. 3 days of pretending nothing had shifted while everything inside me screamed. I watched him closely. The way he smiled at his phone. The way he left the room to take certain calls. The way he seemed lighter, almost energized, in a way he hadn't been with me in months. On the third day, confirmation found me. A notification popped up on my phone, a tagged photo. A mutual acquaintance had posted it casually, unaware of the damage it would cause. I opened it slowly. There he was, standing outside the same restaurant printed on that receipt, smiling in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. And next to him stood a woman I didn't recognize, angled slightly toward him, close enough to suggest familiarity but distant enough to remain deniable. The timestamp matched the receipt. My heart didn't race. It dropped. It felt like an elevator cable snapping, that sudden, weightless plunge where you realize there's nothing beneath you anymore. I zoomed in on the image, searching for evidence I was wrong. Maybe it was a group dinner cropped poorly. Maybe it was harmless. But there was no group. Just them. Comfortable. Natural. Practiced. The realization settled slowly and cruelly. This wasn't new. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a mistake. This had been growing while I was still fighting to protect us. That night, I asked him to sit down. My voice surprised me. It was calm. Too calm. Like I was narrating someone else's heartbreak, instead of living my own. I showed him the photo first. Watched his expression shift, not dramatically, but enough. A flicker of something before he smoothed it over. I asked who she was. He answered quickly. A colleague. A team dinner. Nothing more. I mentioned the receipt. His jaw tightened. And then it began. Denial first. He said I was jumping to conclusions. That dinners happen. That not everything is scandalous. Then irritation. He asked why I was going through his things. Why I seemed determined to find problems. Why I couldn't just trust him. Trust. The word landed like mockery. When I didn't back down, when I calmly repeated the inconsistencies, the location, the timing, the 2 entrees, his tone sharpened. Blame came next. He said I had been distant lately, that I had been overanalyzing everything, that my insecurity was exhausting him. He said anyone would feel suffocated under constant suspicion. I hadn't even raised my voice. I hadn't accused him of cheating. I had simply asked for clarity, but clarity threatened him more than confrontation. Then came the coldness, the emotional withdrawal that hurt more than the lies. He leaned back and said maybe we had grown apart, that maybe we weren't the same people anymore, that relationships evolve, and sometimes they outgrow themselves. Outgrow. As if I were an outdated version of something he once needed. He didn't confess. He didn't apologize. He reframed. In his version, this wasn't betrayal. It was evolution, and that's when I understood something devastating. He wasn't scrambling to protect our marriage. He was already stepping into another one. Within weeks, the photo became more than a tag. It became a pattern. He posted openly now. Subtle at first. A coffee date. A blurred background that wasn't our home. Then clearer images. Shared events. Smiles that looked rehearsed. People adjusted faster than I did. His friends followed her. Commented heart emojis. Welcomed her into spaces I had once occupied. There were no public questions. No hesitation. It was as if I had been edited out of a script and replaced with a newer draft. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was silent and public at the same time. Mutual acquaintances stopped asking how we were doing and started asking how I was holding up. Church members avoided eye contact. Invitations slowed down. He told people we had been struggling for years, that the connection had faded, that we both knew it was ending. Both. I had been fighting for something he had already left. The most painful realization wasn't that he loved someone else. It was that he had emotionally relocated before physically leaving. He didn't look torn. He didn't look conflicted. He looked relieved. And that's when the real pain hit. Not the affair. Not the public embarrassment. But how easily I was replaced. Like I had been a placeholder. Like my years beside him were temporary scaffolding while he built something else in secret. I replayed every memory in my head, searching for the moment he had left me emotionally. Was it during the late nights? The distant replies? The subtle defensiveness? Had he already chosen her while still sleeping beside me? The question hollowed me out. But the most terrifying part wasn't that he moved on. It was realizing he had been preparing to. The day I realized he had been preparing to leave me was the day something inside me went quiet. Not shattered, not hysterical, quiet. Up until that point, I had still been chasing something invisible. An explanation, a confession, a single honest sentence that would make the collapse make sense. I kept replaying conversations in my mind, searching for the moment I missed, the sign I ignored, the flaw in myself that made him look elsewhere. Why wasn't I enough? When did you stop choosing me? Was I ever really your forever? But every time I asked him for clarity, he gave me revision, not truth. He told me we had grown apart. He said the connection had faded. He implied that I had changed, that I had become too emotional, too analytical, too distant. In his version of events, there was no betrayal, only evolution. I began to understand something painful. He was never going to give me closure, because closure required accountability, and accountability would disrupt the new narrative he had carefully constructed. So I stopped asking. That was the turning point. Not because I suddenly stopped hurting. I didn't. The ache still woke me up at night. The silence in the house still echoed too loudly. But I realized that begging to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding me was another form of self-abandonment. I had already been erased once. I wasn't going to erase myself trying to be remembered. Instead of asking him more questions, I made appointments. A therapist first. The first session felt humiliating. Saying the words out loud that my husband had emotionally replaced me before physically leaving made the betrayal real in a way screenshots and receipts never had. But when the therapist looked at me and said gently that my confusion was not weakness, something shifted. For months, I had doubted myself more than I doubted him. Now I began doubting the narrative that I was the problem. I hired a lawyer quietly, not to fight, not to retaliate, but to protect what was legally and financially mine. I opened a separate account. I changed passwords. I gathered documents. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he had tried to phase out. Independence didn't arrive in one bold decision. It arrived in paperwork, in boundaries, in silence. I stopped checking his social media. I stopped asking mutual friends for updates. I stopped analyzing whether his new relationship looked real or serious. It no longer mattered. What mattered was rebuilding the version of me that had slowly disappeared while trying to keep him comfortable. I returned to routines that had nothing to do with him. Morning walks without my phone. Coffee at the same small cafe, where no one knew my story. Reading books I had postponed because I was too busy supporting his schedule. At first, the solitude felt like loss. Then it began to feel like space. And in that space, I met myself again. I started remembering the woman I had been before I reduced myself to keep peace. The woman who had ambitions, opinions, boundaries. I realized something that stung but also empowered me. I hadn't been erased because I was unworthy. I had been discarded by someone who required novelty more than depth. There is a difference. As I stabilized, the reactions around me shifted. Friends who had remained neutral began expressing quiet support. Family members who once avoided the subject now asked careful questions. Even acquaintances who had accepted his new relationship without hesitation began noticing how quickly it had materialized. Strength changes perception. When I stopped appearing broken, people stopped assuming I was. Even he noticed. During one of our final legal meetings, he looked at me differently. Not with love, not with regret, with uncertainty, as if he had expected more visible damage, as if he thought I would still be chasing him for answers. But I wasn't. I answered questions calmly, signed documents without trembling, spoke clearly about logistics without emotional leakage. My composure unsettled him more than my tears ever had. He was prepared for drama. He wasn't prepared for dignity. Forgiveness became a private question I didn't rush to answer. Some days, I felt peace. Other days, the memory of being replaced so cleanly still tightened my chest. But I understood something essential. Forgiveness was optional. Clarity was mandatory. Clarity that I had loved sincerely. Clarity that trusting quietly was not foolish, it was courageous. Clarity that someone else's inability to honor me did not reduce my value. On the day everything was finalized, there was no scene, no raised voices, no cinematic goodbye, just signatures and the quiet end of something I once believed would last forever. As we stood to leave, there was a brief pause, the kind that invites last words. He looked at me, waiting, maybe expecting anger, maybe expecting accusation, maybe expecting nostalgia. Instead, I looked at him without searching for anything in return. And for the first time since the unraveling began, I felt taller than my pain. I didn't thank him. I didn't insult him. I didn't ask him why. I simply told him the truth he hadn't anticipated. That being replaced had not destroyed me. It had revealed me. He thought he erased me from his life. But the last thing I said to him made him realize I was never the one disappearing.